So, good morning and good afternoon and good evening, whatever time of day the moment finds you. I'm glad we're here sharing it together. My name's Danny Hunter. I'm the director of the Ralph D. Winter Research Center, a joint project of Frontier Ventures and WCIU, William Carey International University. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to what we hope is the first of many such events for us. Just a few items concerning logistics, and then we'll hear from today's speaker. Our plan is to hear first from our speaker, Dr. Jose Abraham, and then when Jose's concluded his presentation, we'll move to a time of question and answer that'll be moderated by me. If you have questions, you can use the raise hand reaction found in the toolbar at the bottom of the window. Just click on react and raise hand. I'll call on you. We ask that you keep yourselves muted with your cameras off during the presentation, but then feel free to turn your audio and cameras on as you ask a question. You could also put questions into the chat. We'll be monitoring that, and someone will read them out for you. We wanted to let everyone know that we are recording the webinar. We realize some of you may have security concerns, so if you do, please let us know via email at research@wciu.edu. We'll be sure that you don't appear visibly or audibly when we post the recording. And some of you have already done that, and we're very grateful for that. We're honored today to have our neighbor from down the street at Fuller, Dr. Jose Abraham, come today to discuss our topic, What is Islam really? Decolonizing Western definitions of Islam. Dr. Abraham is the Associate Professor of Islamic Studies at Fuller Theological Seminary, where he teaches courses on Islam, world religion, missiology, and global Christianity. He earned his PhD from McGill University, focusing on the Mapila Muslims of Kerala in South India, and his first book, Islamic Reform and Colonial Discourse on Modernity in India, examines how colonial modernity shaped Islamic reform movements. He's trained in Christian theology and comparative religion. He's previously taught at Concordia in Montreal and United Theological College in Bangalore. And his forthcoming book explores Orientalism and Islamophobia and their implications for Christian-Muslim engagement and faithful Christian witness. Dr. Abraham, please take it away.
Thank you, Dr. Hunter. It's a privilege for me to be here with you all for this first ever webinar of Ralph Winter Research Center. When I read that one, I was a little surprised. Is it the first ever? Yeah. Proud to be a colleague and also a friend of the center, and thank Dr. Danny Hunter and others at the center who actually invited me and gave me this opportunity to make this presentation. The webinar is based on my forthcoming book. So this is not the actual cover, or maybe sometimes even the title can actually change, but at least for now, its name is Beyond Orientalism, Christian Approaches to Engaging, Decolonizing Christian Approaches and Engagement with Muslims. I'm actually still trying to learn the title. Yeah. So, for many Christians serving among Muslims, the greatest barrier to meaningful engagement is not Islam itself, but our idea of Islam. Too often, our engagement with Muslims is shaped less by lived relationship and more by inherited assumptions from outdated textbooks, distant scholarship, or media caricatures. If Islam is commonly portrayed as a monolithic, timeless system, a rigid set of doctrines and rituals that remain unchanged across cultures and generations, this image tempts us to believe that what we learned in an introductory course or a seminary class years ago is sufficient to understand Muslims today. It also leads us to imagine that missionary responses crafted decades ago can still be applied wholesale in the present. But this perception is deeply flawed. These assumptions are not accidental. Our image of Islam has been shaped over centuries by polemical and colonial narratives. From medieval crusade rhetoric to Enlightenment dismissals and colonial propaganda, Islam has often been cast as the other, irrational, oppressive, and inferior to Western ideals. Muslims have been portrayed as violent fanatics, their prophet as a false messenger, and their religion as a threat to Christian civilization. Such distortions, whether theological or political, have continued to shape missionary approaches, often unconsciously. They prevent us from recognizing Muslims as our neighbors, complex human beings created in God's image, shaped by distinct histories, cultures, and aspirations. To move forward, we must take time to examine how these views of Islam were historically formed and the power they still exert on our thinking today. This presentation offers a different approach, one that seeks to decolonize our understanding by listening more deeply and engaging more humbly and walking alongside Muslims with love, trust, and commitment to shared humanity. So, this paper unfolds in three parts. First, a historical survey of Christian Muslim relations. Second, an engagement with post-colonial Christian thought. Post-colonial Islamic thought. And finally, a reflection on the missiological implications of decolonizing Western definitions of Islam. So, part one, a brief history of Christian Muslim encounters. The history of Christian Muslim relations span nearly 14 centuries and includes not only moments of theological contestation and military confrontation, but also long periods of coexistence, intellectual exchange, and mutual recognition. In the 7th century, Islam emerged in a region already saturated with the diverse Christian traditions. As an Asian faith, Christianity has spread widely across Asia and North Africa soon after its birth in Jerusalem. By the time of Prophet Muhammad, vibrant Christian communities flourished under both the Byzantine and Sassanid empires, particularly in Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, and Arabian Peninsula. Islam's rapid expansion after Muhammad's death brought vast Christian population under Muslim rule, yet these early centuries were not defined solely by conflict. Christians and Jews were legally recognized as the people of book, allowed to live and practice their faith within the Muslim lands. Indeed, by the 9th century, nearly 200 years after the Arab conquest, there were more Christians living in Asia than in Europe. However, over the centuries, Christian communities in Asia and North Africa experienced gradual decline due to a complex set of factors, including shifting political powers, changing social dynamics, and internal ecclesial changes. While some of these changes occurred between Christendom and Islam, building upon the centuries of polemics and cultural caricature, European powers colonized almost all while some of these changes occurred under Muslim rule, they were rarely the result of a systemic religious persecution and often involved mutual adaptation and negotiation. Yet, despite long periods of coexistence, intellectual exchange, and negotiated pluralism, this more complex historical reality failed to shape the dominant European Christian imagination. Instead, Western perceptions of Islam were formed by memory of laws, the fear of Islamic political and military power, and the enduring trauma of civilizational defeat. So, as Norman Daniel shows in his seminal work, Islam and the West, Making of an Image, medieval Christian polemics constructed a caricature of Islam and its prophet. Muhammad was often depicted as a lecherous warmonger, Islam as a bellicose and promiscuous religion, and Quran as a fraudulent pseudo-scripture, cobbled together from Jewish and Christian sources, infused with what were perceived to be the epileptic ravings of a false prophet. This adverbial imagination found its most violent institutionalized expression in crusades beginning in the 11th century. These were not merely military expeditions, they were theological projects that sacralized violence and defined Islam as a heretical threat to Christendom. Labels such as Saracen, Moor, and later Turk were used indiscriminately to lump together Muslims of diverse ethnic, linguistic, and theological tradition, reducing complex societies to a singular enemy. Over time, this oppositional stance hardened, reinforced by myths of Muslim cruelty and glorification of Christian martyrdom. The Protestant Reformation and Enlightenment did not dismantle these images. Rather, they re-articulated them in new ideological terms. Reformers like Martin Luther referred to Muhammad as the devil's son, and many Christian writers of the era employed apocalyptic rhetoric, naming him the Antichrist. European colonialism of the 18th and 19th centuries brought to culmination a long history of theological hostility and civilizational rivalry between Christendom and Islam. Building upon the centuries of religious polemics and cultural caricatures, European powers colonized almost all Muslim countries. This domination was not secured by military conquest alone. It was legitimized by an ideological framework rooted in the logic of modernity. Enlightenment ideals of reason, secularism, and progress were invoked to justify imperial rule, casting European societies as the universal standard against which Islamic societies were to be judged. So, this narrative of a civilizational superiority, what scholars now refer to as a colonial modernity, became foundational to the construction of a modern world and the modern forms of knowledge. Christian missionaries, often deeply shaped by these Enlightenment values, collaborated with the colonial administrators to advance such ideals in the name of Christian mission. Their entanglement with the empire profoundly reshaped Christian-Muslim relations, reinforcing the Islamophobic attitudes and producing enduring caricatures of Islam. In what follows, I highlight three critical ways in which a colonial modernity reshaped Christian-Muslim encounter with Islam. One, by constructing Islam as the monolithic and a static religion, and two, by marginalizing Sufism as a spiritual diversity of Islamic tradition, and three, by portraying Muslims as uncivilized people in need of enlightened reform through European intervention. So let me explain the first point, the construction of Islam. Orientalist scholars and colonial administrators and Christian missionaries played a central role in constructing Islam as a monolithic, trans-historical, and irrational religion. One of the most influential tools in this project was the emergence of world religions paradigm, a modern classificatory framework that reduced global religions to static systems, easily compared and hierarchically arranged. This framework stripped Islamic tradition as well as all other non-Christian traditions of their historical dynamism and internal diversity, rendering them as fixed objects to be studied, reformed, or overcome. Diana Ek challenges this essentializing view by reminding us that religions are not like stones passed from hand to hand through the ages. They are dynamic movements, more like rivers, flowing, raging, creative, splitting, converging. Such representations were not neutral. They legitimized colonial domination and missionary intervention by framing religions like Islam as stagnant and in need of reform. Christian theology of religion, too, was shaped by the paradigm of world religions. Dominant models such as exclusivism, inclusivism, and pluralism emerged within the framework of European power and epistemological superiority. Those who don't know these terms, I just explain. Exclusivism asserts that salvation is available only through explicit faith in Christ. Inclusivism allows that people of other religions may be saved, but only through Christ's work. And pluralism holds that multiple religious traditions offer valid paths to salvation. Although these models reflect sincere efforts to grapple with the reality of religious diversity, they remain inadequate for a Christian-Muslim engagement. They permit Christians to make theological judgments about Muslims without listening to Muslim voices or recognizing their agency. Too often, Muslims are treated as passive objects of salvation rather than as subjects shaped by rich tradition, deep ethical commitments, and embodied faith. These frameworks have failed to generate a missiology grounded in hospitality, mutual transformation, and relational justice. Instead, they continue to obstruct the kind of deep listening and theological humility that authenticate Christian that authentic Christian Muslim engagement requires. Secondly, removal of Sufism from Islam. Muslims understand their faith, understand Islamic tradition as articulated in the well-known Hadith of Gabriel to comprise three interrelated dimensions: Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. Islam encompasses the dominion of Sharia, the Islamic law, including the five pillars and ritual practices. Iman refers to the six articles of faith: belief in God, angels, scriptures, prophets, the day of judgment, and divine decree. And Ihsan centers on cultivating an awareness of God, God's constant presence, worshipping as if you see him, as the Hadith states. Historically, Sufism nurtured Ihsan, this awareness of God, through practices of ethical discipline, remembrance, and spiritual companionship, serving as a vibrant tradition that animated the inner life of Islam. Orientalist and colonial readings of Islam, however, fragmented this triadic unity. Islam was increasingly reduced to Sharia, restricted to legal codes, ritual observances, and outward conformity. The deeper interior dimension of Iman, the faith, and Ihsan, the spirituality, were marginalized or dismissed altogether. This reductionist portrayal cast Islam as a religion of legalism, lacking inner vitality or spiritual aspiration. Detached from its Quranic and prophetic foundation, Sufism was reframed not as the heart of Islamic spirituality, but as a deviation from orthodoxy, rather than as an animating force behind Islamic belief and practices. Christian missionaries in the colonial context often reinforce this reductive portrayal of Islam. Sufi poetry, rituals, and devotional practices were frequently dismissed as folk Islam, the supposed superstitious religion of the masses, contrasted with the more rational, legalistic Islam associated with the scholarly elite. This dichotomy not only mirrored colonial taxonomies that divided the world into civilized and the primitive cultures, but also helped sustain a distorted hierarchy within Islamic tradition themselves. As a result, Sufism began to be taught as a tradition independent of Islam, frequently categorized under folk religions rather than as an integral expression of Islamic spirituality. Missionary scholars and Orientalists alike contributed to this fragmentation by speaking of Islams in the plural, treating the tradition not as a coherent, though diverse, religious civilization, but as a loose collection of disconnected and localized practices. 3. The civilizing mission and the transformation of Muslim societies. The European colonialism positioned itself as the zenith of human progress, embodying the ideals of modernity, reason, and civilization. So within this ideological framework, non-European societies, particularly Islamic ones, were portrayed as stagnant, irrational, and urgently in need of reform. This narrative provided the moral justification for the so-called civilizing mission, through which the colonial powers dismantled indigenous institutions, imposed European models of governance, law, and education. Sharia courts were either abolished or relegated beneath the colonial legal systems rooted in secular jurisprudence. The traditional Islamic education, centered in madrasas and mosques and sustained by centuries of theological, legal, and philosophical scholarship, was sidelined in favor of English language schools designed to produce a bureaucratic class loyal to the colonial state. In parallel, new national borders were artificially drawn across the Muslim world, fragmenting the Ummah or the Islamic community and severing long established networks of trade, pilgrimage, scholarship, and religious solidarity. Indigenous systems of governance, often grounded in Islamic ethical and juridical traditions, were either dismantled or reconfigured into secular parliamentary forms modeled on European liberalism. Christian mission became deeply entangled in this colonial project. Missionaries frequently internalized the civilizational hierarchies of their colonial patrons, perceiving Islamic societies as deficient, lacking in education, moral development, or spiritual vitality. In this context, Christian mission was reframed not merely as some gospel proclamation, but an extension of Enlightenment ideals. Mission schools thus advanced not only literacy, but also European norms of secular rationality, gender roles, and secularism. Consequently, Christian witness was often transformed into a vehicle of a cultural assimilation rather than a dialogical encounter grounded in humility, mutual respect, and theological hospitality. Now I'm moving to the second part of my paper, the post-colonial critics and the reimagining of Islam. One of the formative works that shaped my understanding of colonial modernity is the Provincializing Europe by Dipesh Chakrabarty. In this influential book, Chakrabarty argues that to grasp the shape of modern world, we must recognize the centrality of European political ideals and the institutional forms, such as secular governance, liberal legal systems, and modern education, which were globalized through colonialism. These structures did not vanish with the end of colonialism. Rather, they became embedded in the legal, educational, and political infrastructures of a post-colonial Muslim world. The modern world then is not a rupture from the colonial past, but a continuation of its logic in the transformed yet recognizable ways. The dominance of European categories of thought remains pervasive and cannot simply be erased. Decolonization, therefore, does not imply a return to the pre-colonial moment that never exists, but rather a deliberate decentering of European modernity and the recognition of alternative trajectories. So one of the concepts that really actually helped me to understand this one is Eisen starts the concept of multiple modernity. Every culture crafts its own path to modernity, shaped by its historical, religious, and social experiences. The possibility of articulating Islamic modernity emerges only when the European modernity is provincialized or decentered, no longer seen as a universal or normative. It is also important to recall that Europe's own intellectual awakening was indebted to Muslim societies. Muslim societies. Arab scholars preserved and translated the works of Aristotle, Plato, and other Greek philosophers, texts that were later rendered into Latin and English, laying the foundation for a European Renaissance and Enlightenment. This forgotten genealogy unsettles the narrative of European exceptionalism and invites a more critical appraisal of the epistemological hierarchies within modern academia. To retrieve the distinctiveness of Islamic modernity, Islam must be approached on its own epistemological terms. The European concept of religion, which presupposes a division between sacred and secular, does not align with how Muslims have historically understood their faith. Islam was traditionally been expressed as a deen, a comprehensive way of life that integrates theology, ritual, practice, politics, ethics, aesthetics, and a social order. This integrated vision invites us to recover and appreciate the institution, languages, and pedagogies that have sustained the Islamic life across generations. As deen, Islam is not reducible to creed or law. It's a discursive tradition, a living and evolving conversation among the Muslims about how to follow God faithfully in diverse circumstances. This decolonial turn in Islamic studies have been advanced by a number of contemporary Muslim thinkers, including Talal Asad, Sabah Mahmoud, and Shahab Ahmad. Their collective work challenges dominant academic and missionary framework that have often reduced Islam to a fixed system of doctrines or legal rules. Instead, They recover Islam as a tradition shaped by ongoing interpretation, ethical deliberation, and spiritual striving and communal formation. This reorientation not only disrupts reductive portrayal of Islam, but also calls into question the universality of European concepts that have long structured the study of religion. In doing so, it also challenges the influential claims, such as those made by Lamin Sana, that Islam's scriptural and linguistic structures renders it resistant to cultural translation. From the perspective of Islamic discursive tradition, Islam has been always translated, adapted, and lived in diverse cultural and social contexts. I hope you know the argument of Lamin Sana that gospel is translatable, but Islam is not translatable. Its implications of Christian studies are significant. Like any living tradition, Islam cannot be grasped through introductory textbooks, abstract theological models, or doctrinal summaries alone. It must be engaged through its discursive practices and its embodied forms, rituals, gestures, architecture, clothing, food, music, and moral comportment. To understand Islam deeply is to encounter the ways in which it is lived, transmitted, and interpreted within real communities. This necessarily entails engagement with the Muslims themselves. So this insight was powerfully demonstrated in the work of Evelyn Reisasher at Fuller Theological Seminary. In her teaching on Islamic societies, Reisasher consistently emphasized that Islam is not merely a system of doctrines, but a way of life that can be heard, seen, smelled, touched, and tasted. Her course on non-verbal dimensions of Islam explored the sensory world of the Muslim life, the sound of the call for prayer, azan, and the Quranic recitation, the smells of spices and incense, the taste of Muslim cuisine, the textures of clothing and the prayer rugs, and the rhythms of Sufi music and poetry. For Reisasher, these embodied elements were not peripheral, but essential to the understanding of Islam as it is lived. Her pedagogical vision remains a vital model for decolonized and dialogical approach to Islamic studies. This approach on lived encounter echoes the experience of Roland E. Miller, a Lutheran missionary who served for decades in Kerala, South India. In his book, Muslim Friends, Their Faith and Feelings, Miller argues that friendship is the most effective way to learn about Islam. Personal relationship, he observed, opened pathways to emotional and spiritual texture of Muslim life that academic study alone cannot reach. Now, moving to the last part, the missiological implications of post-colonial approaches to Islam. If Islam is a diverse, historically evolving and discursive tradition, as argued throughout this paper, then no single Christian approaches to Islam can claim finality or universal applicability. Any response, however prominent or theologically sophisticated it may be in its time, remains historically situated and contextually bound. Christian engagement with Islam, therefore, must not rely on fixed doctrinal position or static apologetic strategies. Instead, it should be understood as a dynamic relational process shaped by time, place, mutual encounter, and evolving realities of Muslim life. In this regard, it is important to recognize that European Christian responses to Islam are not the only expressions of Christian engagement in history. Across North Africa, East Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Christians and Muslims have lived side by side for over a millennia. These communities developed distinct patterns of interreligious encounter, marked not by polemic or dominance, but by negotiation, coexistence, and theological engagement with the shared cultural worlds. I began this lecture drawing the attention to early Christian Muslim relations in the Middle East during the first centuries of Islamic rule. The theological writings, scriptural commentaries, and interreligious dialogue that produced by Arab and Syriac speaking Christians offer rich yet often neglected resource for contemporary reflection. Tragically, much of this non European Christian heritage remains understudied and untranslated, largely absent from Western curricula and missionary discourse. A truly decolonized Christian engagement with Islam must recover and learn from these diverse legacies, allowing them to inform our theology of religions, pedagogical framework, and practices of witness. Effective witness does not begin with a proclamation alone, but also with attentive presence, discerning what Muslims value, how they live, and how God is already at work in their communities. J. Dudley Woodbury wisely observes any meaningful dialogue with Muslims need to start by walking with them, listening to them, and asking them questions. So, echoing this, Terry Mack emphasized that contextualizing the gospel requires Christians to engage in religious thinking alongside others, entering their conceptual worlds, using their language, and honoring their questions and traditions. Christian Muslim relations then must be grounded not in the posture of superiority, but in love, justice, and empathetic understanding. These, I suggest, are the defining marks of missiological implications for of decolonizing Islamic studies. In this regard, Amos Young offers a helpful triadic framework: orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy. His model calls us to consider not only what we believe and do, but how we feel and relate in humility, friendship, and a shared humanity. Orthodoxy is relating with Muslims in the realm of words and ideas. It includes share the good news of Jesus in ways Muslims can understand, using respectful language and meaningful metaphors. But true engagement also means opening our hearts to hear how Muslims understand God, faith, and justice. We do not enter dialogue simply to teach. We also come to learn. South African Muslim scholar Farid Essaq, shared by the struggle against apartheid, reminds us that real dialogue requires vulnerability, not just intellectual curiosity. Similarly, Mona Siddiqui speaks of dialogue as a presence, being willing to step into another person's story and be changed by it. These insights call us to practice reciprocal hospitality, not only by welcoming Muslims, but also letting ourselves be welcomed into their lives. Orthopraxy moves us beyond words to shared action. In many parts of the world, especially across global South, Muslims and Christians live side by side and face common challenges: poverty, displacement, gender injustice, environmental destruction, and political violence. Missional engagement cannot ignore these realities. To embody the gospel today means joining with Muslims in the work of justice, healing, and peace. This does not dilute the uniqueness of Christ. It demonstrates his presence in the public struggles of our communities. And finally, orthopathy refers to engaging Muslims at the level of affect and emotion. It calls for empathy, vulnerability, and humility to be shaped by those we encounter. As Amos Young describes it, this is heart-to-heart engagement where we do not merely exchange ideas, but share our deepest fears, longing, and hopes. It entails cultivating friendship that are not strategic or instrumental, but rooted in mutual care and sincere presence. In many Muslim societies, relationships are foundational to all forms of communication and trust. If our hearts are closed, our message will remain unheard. But when we extend hospitality, compassion, and trust, we create sacred spaces for the Spirit of God to move in unexpected and transformative ways. Together, these three, orthodoxy, orthopraxy, and orthopathy, offer a holistic vision for Christian Muslim engagement. They calls us to proclaim the gospel with humility, to act for justice with our Muslim neighbors, and to relate with the compassion and mutual respect. This approach invites us to kenotic presence, to walk humbly with others, and to join Spirit's transformative work already unfolding in Muslim communities. So, in conclusion, as we seek to faithfully engage with the Muslims, We must begin by unlearning the distorted images we have inherited. These misrepresentations, shaped by colonial histories, polemical theologies, and media caricatures, have obscured the richness of Islamic tradition and humanity of Muslim societies. They tempt us to relate from a posture of superiority rather than one of humility, curiosity, and love. Decolonizing our understanding of Islam requires more than academic critique. It demands a theological self-reflection. It compels us to examine the framework we use, the histories we inherit, and the assumptions we bring into dialogue. Above all, it calls us to listen, not to debate or convert, but to understand. We bear witness to Christ not by negating the religious worlds of our Muslim neighbors, but by embodying his love with them with patience, respect, and a deep attentiveness. Only when we meet Muslims as fellow image bearers with open hearts and unclenched fists can we offer good news that is truly good for all. This approach does not dilute the gospel, it deepens its meaning, invites us to walk in the ways of Jesus with vulnerability, courage, and compassion. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Abraham, for this excellent presentation. I want to take this opportunity now to open it up. We still have a good 20 minutes for conversation. So if anybody would like to ask a question, feel free to raise a hand. I see Ted Prophet has a hand up. So we're going to go to him first.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Abraham. I have a question. You had a map that showed the spread of Islam. However, you did not show its spread into the Balkans. So my question is this. Islam was colonial. How does Islam's colonization compare with Christian colonization?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Ted, for that question. So I think you were talking about the map during the Ottoman period. So I did not actually show that one. That is true. So because I was focusing only on the classical period, and I think the main intention or my objective was actually to talk about that the coexistence that was there at least in the beginning of the Christian-Muslim relation. That means before the decline of Christianity in the Middle East. So from my understanding, I agree with your argument that both are actually colonial. That means the European colonialism is similar to actually the colonialism or maybe the domination of the Muslims during that time, especially actually from an Islamic perspective. I think that is what actually this image of Muslims that came to us. But still, actually, there is one difference. That is what actually I am focusing on the book, which is actually coming. The difference is that even after the European colonial period, the colonial institutions that came with colonialism that still actually survive. That means European colonialism actually redefined the world forever. That means it is not going to actually end. We are not going to actually draw the maps, the borders that actually came with colonialism. That border is still going to actually exist. The modern education is not going to change with Islamic education. We are not going to actually replace Islamic education with the modern education, or we are not going to actually change the legal systems with any of these local systems. So in that sense, the European modernity is much more pervasive and much more actually universal and dominant than actually the Islamic colonialism or any other colonialism that existed actually before. That's my understanding, or that is the way actually I wrote the book, which is actually coming. So that is the reason why we need to think about decolonizing the European thing. That's why I told you that in no way we can actually go back to the pre-colonial period. That is not possible because none of those institutions or the histories actually exist anymore. The only question is, can we at least decenter the Europe so that the other centers or maybe the other histories and institutions can actually come to the focus? That is the only thing that we can actually do. And many scholars believe that even that is not possible. So at least we should actually try. That is the whole argument that I am actually trying to make.
Thank you.
Good. Other questions? We've got a couple in chat. If not, I can read those out. One is, what suggestions would you have for evangelicals who think they understand the Quran by a simple reading, apart from Muslim clerical authorities and traditions and the diversity of Islam?
Yeah, so thank you, John, for that question. I think so. I think I have two responses, or maybe 2 points I want to actually make. One is actually we can approach Quran as we like. So I think we always actually approach Quran as we approach the Bible. That means we read the Bible, we read the Quran, and we understand the Quran, and we understand the Bible. The question is the second point that I want to make is, and I'm saying that there is no point actually, there is no problem in doing that. We can actually do it. We can actually use the commentaries to understand the Quran. We can use any tools that is available today for understanding actually the Quran. But I think the important question, that is my second point, is we need to also consider how Muslims use the Quran. What is the place of actually the Quran in Islamic tradition? That is actually the prominent question, not about actually how we approach or how we understand actually the Quran. So in Islamic tradition, Quran is only one of the sources for understanding the law, or maybe understanding the theology, or any of these traditions. So I think that's not the way actually we usually think about the Quran. We think that Quran actually decide everything that Muslims need to actually believe. So yesterday, someone actually sent me a question immediately in my Facebook, the post. So he asked me what Quran think about, or sorry, what Islam actually think about human beings. Are they created actually in the image of God? And I said that yes, they also are actually thinking almost in the same way, that human beings are actually created and they were actually breathed the spirit of God. Then the immediate question that he asked is, if that is true, then why all these Muslims are violent? So then we always actually trying to see that if something is actually written in the Quran, that will have actually implication for everything that Muslims are doing. I'm saying that we can approach Quran as we like, but we also need to consider what is the place of Quran actually for Muslims or in Islamic tradition. I think that second point may be much more meaningful in Christian-Muslim engagement about than actually how we think personally about what is Quran and what is the message of the Quran.
Good, very good. Another question from the chat. You said not to convert as you were making one of your summative statements. Do you see this approach bringing forth fruit of Muslims coming to follow Jesus as Savior and Lord? And if so, do you have any examples you could share?
So maybe I think that sentence may not be, I don't know whether I read it properly or it is not sound properly. So what I meant is that not that there is no place for conversion. That is not actually the idea. I think the spirit in which that sentence was written is like this. What is the objective of our engagement? That is actually the question. That means is conversion is the only reason why we want to actually engage with Muslims, or do we engage them because they are also created actually in the image of God? That is a question that I was asking. I'm not saying that there is no place for conversion actually in a Christian-Muslim engagement. Certainly there will be place for conversion. Certainly there will be place for the sharing the good news of Jesus. But if conversion is the only objective, then you may conclude that our engagement with Muslims will be meaningless when they are not converting. So I'm saying that even if they are not converting, still actually our engagement is meaningful, because that is a mission of God. We are actually engaging in the mission of God. And when we engage in the mission of God, all may not actually convert. That is not actually preventing us, or that is not the reason why we should be actually discouraged. One of the things that Evelyn Reisasher wrote in her book is that she said that there should be some kind of a joy in engaging with actually Muslims. So if a conversion is actually the only objective, then that joy may not actually come. That is a point I want to actually make. So there is a place for sharing. There is a place for proclamation. No, there is no. I'm not at all negating. But if the only objective for all these kind of engagement is actually to conversion, then we are really actually not understanding the meaning of engaging with the people those who are actually created in the image of God.
Thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Abraham, can you provide any comments on the Sunni Shiite divide as related to Christian spirituality?
Yeah, I did not understand the last part related to Christian spirituality. So Sunni Shia divide is actually little different from how we understand denominations in Christianity. It's not like a denominations in Christianity. It was more actually a political thing, or it's began as actually a political division, in the sense the question was who is going to when Prophet Muhammad actually died, the question was who is going to lead the community, and the Sunni Shia actually divide came based on that one. Actually, the Sunni did not even start at that time. Sunni actually, what we call as Sunni, it actually began almost 400 years after this particular moment that I'm actually talking about. So in the beginning, the Shia was there. That means Shia simply means the party. So the party here actually means party of Ali. Ali is actually the son-in-law of the Prophet. So a small group of Muslims believed that the Prophet's son-in-law, Ali, should be the legitimate successor of Prophet Muhammad. So that particular group is known as actually Shia. So that means that they began as a political faction, and then slowly they actually developed many theological the points, in the sense they believed that Ali is the legitimate successor, not simply because he is a son-in-law of the Prophet. They also believed that he had some spiritual vision. He had some spiritual qualities, and those spiritual qualities are possible because he is from the family of the Prophet. So they believed that the legitimate successor should come from the family of the Prophet, because they have a particular access to spirituality, particular access to revelation. So, but for most of the other Muslims, so they are later came to known as Sunnis. For them, leader is actually not a spiritual person. For them, the spirituality is different from politics. That means the successor of the Prophet is simply a political a successor, not a religious or a theological successor. And but Shias are not ready to believe that. Shia believes that the leader is both political leader and also a spiritual leader. And I think that actually made some kind of divisions in the long run. That means by the 10th century, anyone who is not a Shia is mostly considered as actually a Sunni. Sunni is actually the people, those who believe in the Sunnah. Sunnah is actually the tradition of the Prophet. So tradition of the Prophet is actually what the community believes as a truth. That is actually the traditions of the Prophet. I don't know whether that answers the question. So I still don't understand the last part, the question about Christian spirituality.
Now it works. Now it works.
Okay. Please.
Dr. Abram, I'm wondering if you think that there are implications to that divide for how Christians engage with people who are from one or the other party, because obviously the love of God drives us to build relationship with them, but we may need to articulate that spirituality in different ways depending on the community we're engaging.
Okay. So many theologians believe that it is much more easier to actually relate with the Shias than actually Sunnis, mainly because Shias believe actually in the day-to-day guidance of the God. That means Shias believe that they call their leader as Imam. So Imam is always guided by the Spirit, guided by God. That's what they actually believe. So and also they actually believe that their prophet, that means so their leader like Ali and his two sons Hassan and Hussein, they all were actually died for the they all suffered. That is, so it's very similar to actually how we understand actually the suffering of Jesus actually on the cross. So they suffered for the whole community. That's what they actually believe. So you will be able to actually find a lot of parallels between how we understand actually the death of Jesus, how we understand the guidance of God, the meaning of actually spiritual leadership. I think there are in so many ways there is a lot of the space that is actually shared between the Christians and Shias than actually with the Sunnis. Sunnis believe that Quran is the only the guidance, or maybe Quran and Hadith and the other things, and it's not actually entrusted to a particular human being, and also they don't believe actually in the suffering of a person for the sins of the whole community. So I think there is a lot of divide that you can actually find between the Christian spirituality and maybe the Sunni tradition.
No, there's a good question here from Alan, who asks the chart when you were discussing Sufism that showed the division of Islam, Ikhan, and Imam. It was very helpful, but do modern day Muslims actually hold all of those equally? And I ask that both from the clerical perspective as well as a lay perspective.
Yeah, so I think the question is not if you go to a street and ask Muslims about what is Islam, Iman, Ihsan, they may not even know these terms actually. So it may be, I'm saying that these terms may be more the terms that is actually reserved for maybe the ulama, the people who are actually studied the tradition, or the scholars. So I think for common people, how they understand this one is actually to understanding it as a discursive tradition. That means, for example, so when we teach Sufism, when I teach Sufism actually in a class, I'm actually following a particular textbook, and I teach actually use that textbook in order to teach about Sufism. But that may not be the way actually a regular Muslim or maybe a Muslim believer understand actually the Sufism. He may not be understand it actually theoretically, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't have any kind of a Sufi practice. He may not have actually lot of Sufi practices in his day-to-day life, maybe about the prayer, or maybe about the fasting, or maybe something about actually related with maybe some kind of a celebration. So I think in different ways, all these three dimensions that you can actually find with the Muslims, with any kind of actually Muslims. That means they all have certain things to believe, certain things to do, and certain ways in which they think that they are actually being watched by God. They are actually in front of God. So, so even though these three terms are actually very technical terms, certainly you will find actually these ideas very much as discursively understood by Muslims on a day-to-day basis.
Very good. We have another comment on the difference between Islam and Western colonization. From Nelson, it says, I believe the fundamental difference between Western and Islamic colonization lies in where each derives its authority. Islamic colonization, especially here in Africa, tends to be more serious and dangerously effective in reshaping or even destroying entire societies. There is, however, a place for what one might call a polemical colonization, a deliberate effort to challenge and subdue destructive ideas before they erode the moral and social foundations of a people. Not all colonizing forces are the same. Some aim to dominate, others to preserve truth and freedom. Western influence, for all its faults, has often drawn its authority, at least historically, from a biblical worldview. The very concept of personal freedom, including freedom to choose secularism, is in many ways a product of Christian thought. In this sense, what some label as Western colonizations have roots in principles that uphold individual choice and moral responsibility and human dignity, values that stem from Scripture. Can you comment on that as opposed to
Islamic
colonization?
Yeah, thank you, Nelson, for that question. And I'm saying that I'm very careful in actually making general comments about the question that you have actually raised. I'm saying that your experience with the Islamic colonialism is something that is unprecedented. I am saying that even that is not the experience of the Muslims or maybe the Christians living in other part of the world. For example, I am coming from India, and if you live in India, you will never realize that Muslims are a colonizing force. I am saying that in India, that is not the way actually Muslims actually act. So by saying that, I am not actually negating your question, because that is your experience in Africa. So I think I would say that this is something also to do with actually the modern the world. That means the way in which we are actually thinking about religious identities today based on actually the nation states and religious identity. So that is very different from how Muslims actually spread in the classical period. You know that even the term Islam itself is actually a modern term. It's actually a term that came actually in the colonial period in the 18th, 19th centuries. So before that, Muslims were not calling themselves as Muslims. That is not the way actually they were referring to themselves. They always use the word mu'min. Mu'min means a believer. That is what they were actually referring themselves or calling themselves. They called other Muslims also as believers. But it is in the colonial period that they got actually a political identity or a identity that is actually much more than their faith. So Muslim is actually itself is actually a political identity, saying that we are actually different from you. So here actually in the beginning, when they coined that word Islam or Muslim, they were saying that we are different from the colonizers. We are different from Europeans. I think that's what they were actually telling in the beginning. But slowly this identity became actually more consolidated, especially after the colonial period. And what you actually find in Africa and many other places is actually the political implications of that identity creation. That means once they actually realize that they are actually a group that is different from all other group, or they have actually a particular way they can they are actually different, then they will be actually sometimes more dangerous, and it can be actually much more difficult than even dealing with actually colonial period. I'm saying that so take your question as something that is very much not a global understanding of actually Islam, or a global understanding of actually global experience of actually all non-Muslims about Islam. It is something that is, I am saying that very much contextual, and also it doesn't have actually a lot of prehistory. It is only in the last few decades you will find actually some kind of the manifestation like this. I'm saying that you need to place them in its socio-political and economic context in order to understand what exactly it is.
Very good, very good. Well, we've come to the top of the hour. Jay, I do want to give you a chance to ask your question. We'll call that the last one.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Abraham, for this great lecture. Really appreciate it. Just a quick question, because I know you have expertise in the area of Sufism. You know, when you were saying in the colonial period that the colonial impression was breaking off Islam from Sufi, and then also calling Islamic peoples uncivilized, were they talking about Sufi orders specifically? In other words, the official recognized Sufism, or did they take Sufism almost as an adjective? Just anything that's sort of spiritualistic, anything that is less rigid. How broadly were they looking at Sufism when it was separated away from Islam proper and this idea of being uncivilized?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Travis, for that question. So I think we have two words. Sufism itself is actually an Islam. Then we have actually, in the beginning, it was Muhammadanism. During the colonial period, it was not Islam. Islam actually is a term that came actually little more later in the. So that means what the Europeans were doing during the colonial period was actually trying to classify things. So that means we have all isms like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and now Sufism, and that is different from Muhammadanism. So Muhammadanism is considered more like Islam today, but then they were not very sure where to place actually many of these people, those who actually smoke. So many of these Sufis actually were smoking, and they had a strange practices. Some of them were not fasting. Some of them were not going to the mosque 5 times a day for prayer. They looks very different from regular Muslims. That is where actually the problem came for the early Orientalists. And then they found that there were similar kind of people among Hindus. So that means that they cannot actually make a distinction between a Hindu sadhu and a Sufi. And they also found actually similar elements actually in Buddhism. So that's why they thought that it is to be safe, it is better to create this as a different category than actually place it within actually Islam. So that's the reason why we have actually 2 isms, Muhammadanism and Sufism. So only in Islam we have actually this problem of having 2 isms within actually one religion, and that is what actually Muslims are trying to resolve today by saying that no, Sufism is a part and parcel of actually Islam, and that is never actually something that is added later. I think so since Sufism developed as a separate discipline during the colonial period, they were also looking at what are the sources for Sufism, and some of the sources they found is in the beginning they said that this came late. It is not part of Quran, it is not part of Hadith, it came actually much later. And then they also said that it may be more non-Islamic, like Hinduism and Buddhism. It may be more an Eastern spirituality. And there are some of their the arguments also were confirmed by Wahhabis, saying that yes, this is nothing to do with Islam. It is actually totally un-Islamic. So I'm saying that so the Muslims today are actually dealing with both these arguments, saying that they are responding to Wahhabism, saying that no, your Islam is not the only Islam that we know. They are also dealing with actually Orientalists, saying that no, your own understanding of Sufism is also not the right idea of Sufism.
Great. Thank you very much.
That's great. All right. Well, that concludes our time for today. I want to thank all of you for contributing to this lively and important conversation. Please keep an eye out for the recording of today's event. We'll put it on our website, rdwrc.wciu.edu, after we do some editing. And everyone who registered will get an email notification with the link once it's up there. We'll encourage you to share that with anybody that you'd like to. And while you're on the website, you can check out next year's Ralph Winter Memorial Lectureship. Registration's open now, and early bird rates will be available through the end of the year. Thank you all very much. God bless.
You.
Thank you, Dr. Abraham.
Bye-bye.